Cops. After 2 years on TV, it's been canceled. Deadline reports that Paramount has ended the show Cops because of George Floyd's death and protests against police brutality.
Paramount pulled Cops last month when protests aimed at police first began, but then yesterday the move was made permanent.
Is this now the end of police-based reality shows because Cops, one of the longest-running TV shows, has been canceled in the wake of George Floyd's death?
Do you remember this? Let me jog your memory. The year is 2020. President Donald Trump is smack dab between his 2 impeachment trials. There's this disease that people are catching from drinking too much Corona beer or something. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. And it's everywhere. Suddenly, we have a lot of time on our hands to think about the world around us. And then, Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin kills George Floyd. You probably remember all of this. You might even remember the public outcry, the largest protest movement in American history. In that outcry, among many things, there was a call for better police media. Maybe, the thinking went, we hadn't been aware of how bad things were with issues of police brutality because of the TV shows we watch, and the specific vision of policing that they promote. First under the microscope, Cops. You ever heard of that one?
Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
This video is sponsored by MUBI, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/skipintro. The show Cops was kind of an obvious starting place for this discussion. Even if you haven't watched a single episode, its cultural impact has been unavoidable for the last 3 decades, parodied in endless movies.
Time for the men in steel to teach these madcap mammals their devil-may mare attitudes just won't fly.
TV shows.
Bad cops, bad cops. Bad cops, bad cops.
And you're probably even humming the theme song to yourself right now. I mean, even babies know it.
Bad boy, what you do? Come for you.
What you gonna do when they come for you? But there was also certainly a lot of pushback to this idea of media criticism.
I mean, I can't speak for black people. Again, if I felt that the cops were out to get me in any sort of way, what I would want there is more cameras, more body cameras.
I think it's just the way they glorified the cops. And it was like, bad boys, what you gonna do when they come for you? It was never about just like, I'm an unbiased viewer. It was like the bad boys, the cops. Do you know what I mean a little bit? How
change the theme song.
Yeah.
Oh my God. How do we not think of changing the song? That should fix it. So Paramount made the moral choice and did more than just change the theme song. They canceled Cops. Oh wait, no they didn't. They just sold it to Fox Nation. It's alive and well, airing its 36th season right now. And it's not the only reality cop show whose demise was maybe a little exaggerated in 2020.
First it was the show Cops, and now A&E has canceled the police reality series Live PD. It's one of the latest cop shows to get pulled from TV as protests continue over the George Floyd death.
This is Live PD, which is basically Cops, but instead of edited and produced segments, the show is live. We'll get to those air quotes, don't worry. Live PD is kind of the next logical step in the genre's evolution. It launched in 2016 after the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, after Ferguson and Baltimore and Eric Garner, and marketed itself as part of that conversation, promising accountability and transparency.
The fact that we're going to see this as it's happening, you know, there's a national debate going on about how police do what they do. More police departments around the country are embracing body cams. Why? Transparency.
Alas, for all that talk of transparency, in 2020, Live PD did get canceled. Although it wasn't just because of the George Floyd protests. Turns out the show had recorded the police killing of Javier Ambler in Texas and then deleted the footage before it could be reviewed by Internal Affairs. Whoopsie! A&E decided, hey, maybe the show is more trouble than it's worth, and canceled it. Like, they actually canceled it.
And at that point, A&E was kind of just like, okay, we're not going to be in this business. George Floyd is happening. This is here. We're just going to cancel Live PD. There's likely a bit of, taking advantage of the moment as well.
Right.
This is a show that was creating liabilities and hassle for them, but like Paramount, kind of recognizing, oh, people don't like this right now.
That's Sean Campbell, an investigative journalist who's reported on the fall of reality cop shows, as well as the fact that they never seem to stay dead, because in 2022, a new show popped up called On Patrol Live, featuring the same concept, the same set, the same hosts, hell, It's actually currently being sued by A&E for copyright infringement.
What On Patrol Live does is many, many steps removed from just copying the basic concept. This was what the judge said about On Patrol Live when On Patrol tried to dismiss under this concept lawsuit. Because On Patrol Live copies nearly every single element in the same manner, coordination, and arrangement as Live PD, the court does not hesitate to find that the works are substantially similar. On look alone, the two shows are virtually indistinguishable.
On Patrol Live, or Live PD, whatever you want to call it. Throughout this video, I'm going to refer to the franchise as On Patrol: Live: PD because it reminds me of that Adult Swim parody cop show, NTSF SD SUV. Anyways, On Patrol Live runs on Reels, which is a TV channel, and not some fishing company that sells Bratz-themed merchandise. The show has been a massive hit for the channel. In 2023, On Patrol Live had boosted Reels viewership by 34%, producing nearly 6 hours of live content per week. Seriously, this show puts out an absolutely absurd volume of content. In just the 2 years it's been on the air, it's already racked up more than 170 episodes, each running between 2 and 3 hours. And forget being renewed for a measly season, Reels has already purchased 90 more episodes of the TV show. As it turns out, these reality cop shows never died. They just mutated. Welcome to Copaganda, a series of videos exploring the portrayal of the police on television and how that portrayal has shaped our understanding of who the police are and what they should be. There's a playlist around here somewhere. Turns out, a lot of cop shows. For example, on the air, in primetime right now on 4 major networks, starting on Sunday, you got The Equalizer, CSI Vegas, Tracker, NCIS, NCIS Hawaii, Special Forces, World's Toughest Test, America's Most Wanted, FBI, FBI International, FBI Most Wanted, FBI True, The Rookie, Will Trent, Alert Missing Persons Unit, Police 24/7, 911 Lone Star, and we've only made it to Tuesday. You've also got Chicago PD, Walker, SEAL Team, Law & Order SVU, Law & Order Organized Crime, SWAT, and not to mention Blue Bloods. Who could forget Blue Bloods? Not this guy.
But if he's using his authority to seduce a young cop, I can't just look the other way. Right?
Not in this day and age.
Point is, there are a lot of cop shows on TV, but so far all the shows we've talked about in this series have been narrative fiction, and there are 2 major reasons for that. First, I didn't want to watch Cops or On Patrol Live. It seemed really depressing. And for what it's worth, I was wrong. These shows aren't really depressing. They're fucking demoralizing. But more importantly, I think a lot of people have some understanding that a show like Cops is exploitative. After all, these are real people getting arrested for our entertainment, not just some random character actor making a questionable career choice. In 2020, people were a lot more on the fence about a show like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which is why I started there first. And I think there's a lot to be said for analyzing these shows and using them as case studies in order to understand how rampant our myths about the police really are. But these non-fiction cop shows are a completely different animal. For starters, people believe that they're real.
And also based on my survey research, people really do seem to respond to that sort of verisimilitude. Like, people seem to think it's a really accurate, real-time representation of what is happening on a typical night of policing.
That's Dr. Emma Rackstraw.
And I am an economist by training, and I study the criminal justice system, the labor market, and the ways that they intersect with one another. So
I called her up to ask about the way these shows not only impact audience perceptions, but also the communities being policed while these shows are filming.
My top line findings are, I find that police basically start making significantly more discretionary arrests for very low level victimless crimes, things like drug possession and loitering and vagrancy, when the cameras arrive.
So let's talk about these 2 franchises, Cops and On Patrol: Live: PD. How has the genre evolved? What message do these shows send to their audiences about the police? And perhaps most crucially, since these are real people, what kind of impact do they have on real police officer behavior in the communities they document? Cops began in 1989 on the Fox network, which is an unfathomably long time ago in TV terms. That's before Law & Order or The Simpsons. Cops is old enough to run for president if it wanted to, and let's be real, it would definitely beat those 2 geriatric meat puppets. If you're unfamiliar with the show, first of all, I don't believe you. But here's a summary. The show sends out a cameraman and a sound guy with some cops. They record police interactions and then produce 3 segments in each half-hour episode. The police encounters shown to the audience are clearly edited, but they have a real sense of authenticity. The cameras are handheld, the emotions present feel very real, and we all know that there are actual stakes. These people are facing real consequences.
Okay, you're gonna go to jail tonight for possession of controlled substance.
And study after study has proven that this format is far more effective in shaping opinions of the police than narrative TV. And that's the stated goal of Cops. As John Langley, the creator and longtime executive producer of the show, said in an interview with the Running from Cops podcast, his show could or should be interpreted as a documentary.
Cops is as real as we can get it. I see it as a documentary.
This is the kind of thing you'll hear from a lot of creators of these shows, that they're just showing things the way they are. Hell, they even put acts of police brutality in just to keep the police in check.
Well, back up a moment. We have shown all kinds of things that I didn't approve of, but I wanted to show.
Tell me.
Well, I mean, like cops being too rough in a takedown or being unreasonable with the suspect. That happens. So, I mean, I want to show what happens to the greatest extent possible.
Now, these are what we call in the business lies. They're lies. That podcast I mentioned, Running from Cops, great podcast. You should really check it out. They go into way more detail about cops than I will be able to in this video. They compiled statistics from over 800 episodes of the series across its 3+ decades and found a number of stats that are being massively distorted by the show. For example, 84% of interactions on Cops end in an arrest. And that number is on the rise, going from just 61% in season 2 to 95% by season 30. In real life, only 2% of police interactions end in an arrest. Well, yeah, they've gotta make TV. Who wants to watch the police not arresting people? What's wrong with that? I don't know what that accent was, I'm sorry.
And that's just such a massive distortion of reality. You know, most reported crimes in the United States go unsolved, and police officers really infrequently make arrests.
According to Dr. Rackstraw's research, this distortion has real consequences to viewers. In her study, people who watched clips ending in an arrest estimated a significantly higher clearance rate than people who watched a clip that didn't end in one, exacerbating an already striking disconnect between perception and reality, with most people overestimating the number of arrests the average officer makes in a year by an order of magnitude. Most police officers don't actually make arrests as frequently as most people assume, with conservatively high estimates placing that national average around 12 to 14 arrests per year. Okay, so that's not exactly how it is it? What about the types of crimes? Cops massively overrepresents violent crime, drug crime, and prostitution, making up roughly 58% of arrests on the show according to Running from Cops, despite making up just 17% of actual arrests. But the biggest criticism of Cops has been there since the very beginning, that it's racist. A 1998 study of the show by scholars Paul Kuistra, John Mahoney, and Sandra Westerveld found that non-white suspects outpaced white suspects, while over 62% of officers were white, and white victims outnumbered non-white victims. This combination of racial distortion and overrepresentation of violent crime seems to, as they write, quote, suggest are acts of irrational and often drug-induced evil committed by dark-skinned males and promiscuous females. These lawbreakers are a breed of humans different from us who reject many of our cherished social values. I mean, it was so bad that even the producers admit that the show was kind of racist back in the 90s, identifying it as something that they had to change.
The NAACP called up to Fox Network and said, you guys, you're portraying all criminals as black. So, we kind of like, well, there's a disproportionate number, but it's like, but then we said, oh, wait a minute, they're actually right. So, then there was this frantic search for find us white criminals. Find us, where's the white criminals, white hotheads, white trash, white something,
I guess that's better? While Cops deserves very minimal credit for getting their overall race numbers in line with national averages, 28% of arrests are black men or women on the show versus 29% in real life, the show front-loads those arrests, especially violent and drug crime, to the point where 48% of all arrests of black people suspected for a drug crime occur before the first commercial break. And let me tell you, nobody watches to the end. It's why you have crypto bros with no self-awareness posting Wolf of Wall Street memes. Or, dudes unironically thinking Patrick Bateman or Tyler Durden are role models. Hell, you know how I know nobody watches to the ends of things? Because I rarely get people to sign up for my Patreon when I plug it at the end. I mean, just look how much viewership drops off. I'm gonna plug that shit now. Patreon.com/skipintro. Where was I? Even if Cops has gotten credit for its balancing of race, I would argue that it's still targeting a very specific class in America. Whether it's poor minorities or white trash, the show focuses on visible poverty and conflates it with crime. And that's a proven formula for amping up fear around crime. You can see the dynamic in Politico articles that are allegedly about crime, but prominently display homeless encampments in their thumbnail. And I think it's something that is especially prevalent in these reality cop shows, in a way that almost always serves to increase police budgets. Journalist Adam Johnson sums up this media phenomenon well, writing, quote, "The public discourse around visible poverty has been, as always, to turn to police, jails, and a deep bench of dead-eyed, careerist, tough-on-crime prosecutors and mayors. Our president talks nonstop about how much we need more police, how he can't wait to hand another $37 billion to the police. And our media puts all social ills into the vague bucket of public safety, with the parallel assumption that the solution is more police and longer sentences. The point is, Cops is a massive distortion, and because of its non-fiction format, viewers tend to think that they're watching something much more true to reality than it actually is. Cops also lets police departments review their footage before it makes it out over the airwaves, trading creative freedom for better access, with police letting camera crews into places they'd never let journalists. It's worth noting that no money changes hands between the production company and police departments, but this is what makes the relationship mutually beneficial. Although, again, producers have downplayed the amount of censorship the police can and do exercise on the show.
What do you give up for access?
We let them look at the shows, and if they have a real problem, we will change something. And I'll tell you, most people think, oh, there's something that went wrong and they want to hide it. That's not true. Mostly what they want to change is stupid stuff, like, well, that officer wasn't wearing his hat, and part of our regulations, so you have to wear your hat on duty. I've had that a lot. That's just part of the rules that you have to deal with when you're working with certain topics.
Access like that is only gained when you can assure the police that they're going to come off as good and righteous. But there's another major lie that Cops needs to tell in order to be perceived as authentic and real. Here's a question. Have you ever wondered why people sign the release forms to be on the show? Like, who would want to be arrested by the police and then have it broadcast nationally? I mean, you're not going to look good. Producers will tell you that this is because people just want to be on TV, that we have a reality show culture, and, other people are just really big fans of the show.
People sign surprisingly willingly.
They sign releases. Look at the crap you see on so-called reality TV, much of which is phony anyway. But look at how many people sign up and do stupid things, and most people who sign do so, fully cognizant of what they're doing. At this stage of our show's life, people know the show and it has a certain pop cultural iconic value, and they'll say, get those news cameras away from me. Say, we're with the Cops crew. They go, oh, Cops.
But Running from Cops tracked down a bunch of people who appeared on the show, many of whom claim they did not sign a release form. Others were inebriated beyond the point where they could even remember signing the forms. In fact, 24% of all people who appear on Cops are inebriated in some way during their police interaction. Others were tricked.
I think part of the time they might have been tricked to thinking that they were going to be released. Here, sign this release.
Others were harassed and lied to until they relented.
Corey is now sitting in the back of a police car. The police still have not told him why they detained him in the first place. And then a producer from Cops comes up to the window and he says,
I need you to sign this release form or you're going to jail with a felony trespassing.
And others were coerced or threatened into signing, either implicitly or explicitly.
But also, it's not super clear to me that anybody who's in handcuffs can provide informed consent.
Yeah.
They're going to feel like there is some amount of coercion.
We talked about the similar coercive nature of plea deals in the first Law & Order video. And it's all in the name of making good TV. But I'm not even really here to talk about Cops. It shouldn't surprise anyone that it's a biased show. I just had to lay out how bad Cops was so I could really drive home how much worse On Patrol: Live: PD actually is.
We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
From 2016 to 2020, Live PD wasn't just a TV show on A&E. It was the TV show on A&E. By 2019, it was the most watched cable show on Fridays. Granted, that time slot is known as the Friday night death slot, but the show was raking in the ratings, tallying over 2.5 million viewers by its second season. In fact, A&E was so reliant on the show that when it canceled the series in 2020, fans boycotted the network, dropping their primetime viewership numbers by 49% in the following week. Kudos to A&E for taking that hit and sticking to their guns, although it should be noted that they still upload compilations and old clips of Live PD onto their YouTube channel, racking up millions of views, so they're still making money off the whole thing. If I had to guess, that's probably why they're suing for copyright infringement, not because of an ethical reason. The easiest way to describe Live PD is that it's Cops, but live.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan Abrams at our control center at A&E Network headquarters in New York City. We're watching more than 30 live cameras taking in action from all around the country. We're following police units in 6 states on this Friday night, the start of the Halloween weekend, which means the action could get hot and it could get dangerous.
Instead of pre-edited segments, the show broadcasts from a studio where host Dan Abrams directs our attention across some number of departments nationwide that they're following that night. We drop into these different locations at his discretion. When something gets kind of boring, he'll switch away to something else exciting and vice versa.
Back live, let's go right to Arizona. I'm told that Trooper Jacobs is on his way to a multi-car accident. There actually may be people trapped there.
Oh, and instead of 30-minute episodes, each episode is a 3-hour telecast. And there are new episodes on Fridays and Saturdays. So it's kind of like watching Requiem for a Dream and Grave of the Fireflies back to back, and then doing it again the next night, and then doing that every week for 52 weeks. And it's about as uplifting. But a major difference between Cops and On Patrol Live PD is the social and political environments that they arose from. Whereas Cops launched during the height of violent crime in America and channeled the tough on crime, law and order rhetoric that would define the 90s, Live PD entered the chat in a slightly different time, with the biggest conversations around crime and policing centered around the Black Lives Matter movement. And from the very beginning, the show positioned itself specifically as part of that conversation, with creator Dan Abrams telling The Hollywood Reporter, quote, "Live PD is an extension to some degree of body cameras. There's an argument to be made that the public has a right to see how the people that they're paying to engage and lead law enforcement are doing their jobs. You have people who love law enforcement who are watching the show in one way, and people who distrust law enforcement potentially watching it in another. But I think that's all a good thing. If body cameras and our cameras lead to better policing, that's great. I mean, it would be great if it actually led to those things." For more about the broken promises of body cameras, check out my video on The Rookie. Executive producer John Zito echoed the same sentiment in an interview with Entertainment Weekly, saying, quote, "We were taken off the air at the time because there was this belief that the show was propaganda and was too pro-law enforcement. But for people who watched the show, we felt that it was very much not the case. A lot of people who criticized the show had never actually seen the show before. We still feel that the show is that precise forum where these conversations are had about law enforcement in America." It's a pretty similar argument to the one from the creators of Cops, but there is a stylistic change in Live PD and On Patrol Live that really helps drive this point home. The idea that this is real, and that is that it's live.
We are live, so literally anything can happen. We don't know the beginning, we don't know the middle, and we don't know the end.
The walls of the set are plastered in footage pouring in from across the country, and the show loves to remind you that being live is kind of its thing.
Yeah, we're keeping an eye on our departments right now. We've got 42 cameras we're looking at coming in. We got lights flashing in at least 3 of them.
What you are watching here is live police activity in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is happening in real time. So we are seeing this and hearing this and figuring out what's happening as you are. Let's listen.
It is very curated and selected, but it's certainly sending the message very aggressively that it is live. Right? Like it's in the title.
You do distinctly get that vibe when you watch. But here's the dirty little secret about On Patrol Live PD. it's not really that live. If you go to the FAQ section of the On Patrol Live website, they describe the nature of the show this way. The show is filmed in real time and airs live. However, because of television standards and practices, like all live programming, there is a slight time delay to address the safety and security purposes outlined above. The delay can be as little as a few minutes or up to 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the circumstance. Any delay longer than that would be acknowledged on air as having occurred earlier. These earlier segments are always implied to have taken place earlier that night or that day.
As we keep an eye on our 9 live departments around the country, we want to show you something that happened recently in Fulton, California. Officers responded to a report of a possible break-in.
We're responding to a burglary in progress.
But they can take place at any point in the past. Days, weeks, months ago.
The implication is earlier today, right? Like a couple of hours ago? Jessica's arrest happened over 3 weeks before it aired.
And the show is very, very sneaky about how it presents these previously shot segments.
All right, as we keep an eye on our live departments around the country, we want to show you something that happened earlier in Beech Grove. Sergeant Zach Horgan joined in the pursuit of a driver who had fled during a traffic stop.
So Indianapolis just said that they're in vehicle pursuit. They're getting off the highway.
The only indication that this isn't happening currently is that little note in the upper corner of the screen. Dan even makes a point of calling out how many live departments they're following first, before presenting something that happened recently.
As we keep an eye on our 9 live departments around the country, we want to show you something that happened recently in Fulton, California.
And since we know that there is a slight delay already, it's not crazy to think that that might have happened just 20 minutes ago.
We have just gotten in some footage from Hazen, Arkansas. Now remember, there were 2 stolen vehicles, right?
But it could have been shot at any point in the past. Urgency is the name of the game here, from the host presentation to the pumping music as we race to the crime scene.
And I'm seeing some activity in Mission, Texas going on as well. The lights are flashing. Could be another sobriety test there.
It keeps people interested and it raises the stakes, but it's also intentionally misleading. But even setting aside how sneaky those earlier segments are, the 20 to 30 minute delay exists not just to prevent a Janet Jackson-style wardrobe malfunction, but to give police departments the chance to review footage. Because if you scroll up on that FAQ page, you'll see that departments appearing on the show, quote, have the right to review and request editing of on-patrol live footage that could potentially endanger citizens, and/or the safety and security of police officers, and/or compromise departmental operations. Examples of this may include extremely violent and traumatic incidents, the use of racially charged language, or to shield the identity of minors.
But the department also gets a chance to review all footage before it airs. And they functionally have veto power. The language in the actual contracts states that they can disallow any footage if they say it poses some kind of safety or security risk. And that is intentionally very vague. And as far as I can tell, the producers always comply with these requests. Like, there's just no incentive for producers to upset one of the agencies that they're working with, because then they might potentially lose access.
Through FOIA requests, that's the Freedom of Information Act, Dr. Rackstraw got her hands on internal police communications requesting edits, and it's for a lot of reasons. Ones that don't necessarily feel safety related. The Wacoly County Sheriff's Office, for example, requested a number of changes that, quote, reflect poorly on them, since they were in the middle of an evaluation with the Florida Commission for Accreditation, and literally could not afford to look bad. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, the sheriff's office requested changes because there were too many minorities being arrested and that made him look bad. You see, they don't want to be seen as racist. They don't actually want to be less racist. They just want people to stop thinking that they're racist. In Slidell, Louisiana, the police department requested the removal of a clip where an officer told a presumably black suspect, quote, now you got half of I-10 shut down, boy. Because they were afraid that people might think that that was racist. Again, maybe don't say racist stuff if you don't want people to think that you're racist. That's some free advice for you. On Patrol Live PD isn't actually all that interested in transparency. It's more interested in doing PR for the police. And the live format does a lot more than create an artificial sense of reality.
We don't know the beginning, we don't know the middle, and we don't know the end.
Without produced segments, we're completely at the whims of the hosts to explain to us the context of a situation. And a lot of times, they either don't know or don't tell us much.
You know, look, we're seeing this in real time, just as you are, trying to figure out exactly what's happening, so we'll check back in. We go to Greenville, County, South Carolina. Deputy Sam Thompson is there. Vehicle's been pulled over. That's about all we know.
When you simply drop into a situation without context, the perspective of the police is magnified. Sure, the lack of editing makes it feel more real, but we don't know why these people are being stopped by the police. We don't know any information at all. And that gives a blank check to a lot of behaviors that we might find pretty gross in another context.
Corporal Carly Drayton has now moved on, searching a vehicle.
There's no way to know if this is a reasonable search, or even why they're searching the vehicle, but it doesn't matter to the show. We just take the cop at her word. When Dan gets bored of watching this cop dig to the bottom of this tote bag, he just says this.
But so far, just a clue. Don't know if it's going to lead to anything, but important for her to keep looking there.
Whenever the show cuts back to the live studio with Dan Abrams and his co-hosts, both former cops, you'll be hard-pressed to find an example of them being critical of the actions taken by police.
Not only that, you get calls where parents can't get the kids to go to school. They call a deputy to come to the house to talk to the kids. Stuff like that.
Yeah,
happens.
Well, sometimes I hope that they listen to the deputies and they say, I want to look up to that deputy.
There you go.
They'll shoot down questions of profiling.
But is this normal that they've had so many interactions? I mean, did you guys find when you were on the force and you were in a particular area that you'd bump into the same folks again and again?
Hey, they know you and you know them.
Is that right?
All the time.
Minimize acts of cruelty.
The boys! Now! Get up!
That was actually Canine Goose's first bite.
And talk endlessly about just how hard and underappreciated the job of a cop really is.
Yeah, you're going to hear it out there. Every single cop across the country has dealt with exactly something like that. Somebody focusing their situation on you.
Here's even a clip where the co-hosts are downright giddy at the thought of a sports car being sold as civil asset forfeiture, a practice by which the police seize property even when there hasn't been a crime committed.
There it goes.
Souped up new
subsequent, and now going to be maybe forfeiture too. So
we'll see.
Where this is the implicit commentary in Cops, On Patrol Live PD is very explicit in its praise of the police. And while Cops uses dubious means to get people to sign release forms, On Patrol Live PD doesn't even bother, claiming that their show is news and therefore only need to get consent forms for those earlier segments.
Stand right here for me, okay?
Can you get that out of my face? Why is there
No, it's just the cameras down here for your protection and mine there.
The purpose of this show is to portray the police as unabashed heroes. Here's Bridgeport Sergeant Stacy Lyons in the very first episode of Live PD, breaking up a domestic dispute.
Domestics are the most dangerous calls a police officer can go on.
Also, apparently this is before they implemented the earlier distinction on the show, because this is clearly pre-recorded, but we still see it say live in the corner.
You said you haven't been arrested in 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. All right, which means you've been acting somewhat intelligently in the last 10 years. Don't ruin it now, man.
But just hours after she said that on national television, she was arrested for allegedly breaking into her ex-boyfriend's home and assaulting him for being with another woman. Ultimately, those charges were dismissed, but she was required to attend a court-mandated domestic violence program. Usually a cop doesn't have to do domestic violence training if they're not a little guilty. Weirdly, the Live PD broadcast never followed up on her, despite their stated goal of transparency and accountability. But it also might be because Bridgeport pulled out of their contract just 2 months later, stating that, quote, "We don't want the first impression of Bridgeport from a national audience to be unfairly associated with crime. A community should be defined and judged by the best it has to offer, and not by its worst moments." But for a police department, there is real value when their community is portrayed by their worst moments. Nationally, confidence in the police has been generally declining since about 2005, and recruitment along with it. A 2023 Police Executive Research Forum survey found that the number of police organizations reporting difficulty filling positions has risen from about 21% in 2017 to 78% in 2022. Now, like everything crime and policing related, there are a ton of reasons for this, and it's hard to put our finger on what the biggest factor behind that change might be. Maybe some people saw the proliferation of police brutality caught on cell phone video and thought, I don't want to be a part of that. Maybe others saw that same video and thought, I want to be a part of it, but I really can't handle the public backlash. In my city, Seattle, many police officers have left the force. But a big reason for that is that housing is unaffordable. Also, a lot of them died from COVID because it was the #1 killer of the police over the last 3 years, and because they didn't like the vaccine mandates. But, as Dr. Rackstraw discovered, among audiences who consumed reality TV cop shows, they were all but inoculated from this trend, maintaining a high confidence in policing institutions.
They really see this as incredibly valuable. PR for, ensuring future budgets for recruitment purposes in an era where police departments were having and are having a really hard time recruiting for their already budgeted slots. And I find in my work that in counties that had particularly high rates of viewership of the show, they're essentially inoculated against the overall decline in confidence in the police that was happening during this era.
And that effect is something that cops around the country have noticed. As a former Spokane sheriff told the Running from Cops podcast,
I can tell you that LivePD has done wonders for our recruiting.
Really? How?
Applications. People calling us all over the country.
Really?
Yes. It's been amazing.
Really?
It's been amazing the amount of Christmas cards we got from people all over the country.
Get out of here.
No.
That sheriff would go on to say that there's radicalized hate against the police and that this show is directly fighting that war on the side of the righteous.
Because 5 cops died because of radicalized hate. That's why. We all saw that coming. Everybody in this nation should have seen that coming. Every leader in this country should have seen that coming. And we did nothing to prevent it. We allowed that hate to divide this nation. And that's what LivePD has struck into.
And look, maybe you think doing PR for the police is a worthy cause, but it is certainly not transparency or accountability. If it was, it'd be pretty hard to explain the reason why LivePD was canceled in the first place. While it happened in 2020 following the public outcry about George Floyd, it was a different police killing of an unarmed black man that doomed the first version of this show. Over a year earlier, in March 2019, Javier Ambler was tased to death in Austin, Texas by police while allegedly fleeing a traffic stop. It was ruled a homicide by medical examiners, and his cry of, "I can't breathe," was an all too familiar one. LivePD was covering the officers at the time, and even recorded the incident. What a great time for transparency, right?
Yeah, Brian, as you said there, we were able to obtain body cam footage, but that even took us a while. But LivePD was there too with cameras in hand. But even DA Margaret Moore says she's having trouble getting her hands on the footage a year and a half later.
Oh wait, no, it turns out that LivePD producers destroyed the footage before it could be turned over to investigators. Just deleted that shit. Obviously, I understand that they don't want to air a dead body live, but oh, what's that? I'm reading here that this woman found out that her son had been murdered when they aired footage of his dead body live in 2017, uncensored. So it's definitely not an issue with airing a dead body, just a protecting the police thing. Definitely a police protection thing. The deputies in the Ambler case were acquitted earlier this year, although their boss, former Williamson County Sheriff Robert Chody, is currently on trial for evidence tampering. Don't worry, we'll be talking more about that accurately named prick a little bit later. So, the show does not provide any kind of meaningful check on police behavior, either in their on-screen product where they repeatedly tell us how great these officers are, nor in providing evidence in internal investigations and being a supplement to body cams, like they said they wanted to be. But somehow, it gets even worse than that. On Patrol LivePD actively makes the communities where they film less safe. And I can prove it. I want to go back to that quote from executive producer John Zito again. Quote, "There was this belief that the show was propaganda and was too pro-law enforcement. But for people who watched the show, we felt that it was very much not the case." Now, maybe this argument would hold some weight if we were talking about Blue Bloods or Law & Order or Lost. I don't want to hear anything about how the ending sucks if you haven't watched it recently, okay? But here, it doesn't make much sense. Now, I have seen the show, both versions of it. And yes, you can clearly see from the on-screen portrayal of policing that it is propaganda. But you wouldn't have to have seen the show to know that. I don't need to watch the show to know that the way they deleted footage of a police killing was fucked up. I don't need to have taste tested every chocolate product to know that it's fucked up for Mars, Nestle, and Hershey to use child slavery in the Ivory Coast. But unlike those chocolate bars, with On Patrol Live, there's no product you can divorce from the way it's made. I think it's messed up that you use child slavery. But sir, have you even tasted our new chocolate bars? I don't know if you really get what well, the people that eat them don't seem to have any problem with it. I feel like you're missing the point. I like to bite the legs off the child chocolate bars so they can't run away. And in fact, If you just watched the show, you wouldn't know anything about the Ambler case, or any number of the other clips that never made it to air because they made the police look bad. And what you'd never be able to figure out from watching the show is how police behavior changed during shooting.
So it occurred to me that I might actually be able to, find data that could speak to whether police and civilians are having more interactions than they otherwise would, or whether the nature of those interactions have really fundamentally changed.
Dr. Rackstraw's findings are pretty eye-opening. She found that when camera crews show up to film a department, there's about a 20% bump in arrests for low-level, victimless crimes like drug possession, loitering, disorderly conduct, drunkenness, or vagrancy.
I mean, disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct, indecent exposure, you name them all.
From Rackstraw's paper, quote, "These kinds of arrests require low levels of effort for an officer because they are common and often habitual. They may involve known constituents or a set of known locations. Officers typically have high levels of discretion over whether to seek out or make these kinds of arrests."
You wanna let him go? All right, man. Have a good night. Have a good night, buddy. We got other stuff going on.
And that's not because more crimes are being committed when these cameras show up, since we don't see an increase in any other kinds of less discretionary arrests. In other words, police arrest more people once the cameras show up, but it's not because more crimes are being committed, it's because they're cracking down on poor communities, turning every traffic stop into a search for drugs.
And I felt sorry for her as this was unfolding.
Yeah, she's stealing food for her siblings who are hungry, apparently. And that's pretty sad and pretty tragic. It's not like you're stealing to resell something. Food is food, and that's something that we all need.
And you saw that for the officer there was a close call as to whether she was going to charge her at all.
Absolutely, that comes down to officer's discretion. Because of the drug paraphernalia on there, they made that decision to take her to jail.
In fact, there's some evidence that 911 call traffic actually decreases during the filming period. And communities where On Patrol Live PD has shot report a decreased confidence in the police. People who watch the show like the police more. People who are in a community policed by the show do not believe in the police anymore.
There's basically this differential effect, depending on whether you are somebody who's watching from afar or whether you're somebody who's actually living in the community that's experiencing the cameras and experiencing this, increase, this shift and really low level enforcement by the police. So if you're living in one of these places that's experiencing all of this, basically, there's no significant improvement in various measures of public safety. It's also actually possible that various aspects of public safety are getting worse because people seem to be reporting less confidence in the police in these places. And I have some evidence that they're becoming less willing to report crimes to the police. And so in the long term, that could actually be really detrimental for public safety in these communities.
This combined effect of increased arrests for quality of life offenses and reduced confidence in the police can explain why a number of city police departments have stopped working with On Patrol Live PD.
Today, Fox 23 confirmed Police Chief Chuck Jordan decided not to renew the contract with A&E's Live PD that airs on Friday nights because of the way the show represented Tulsa and the department.
Unlike so many cop shows, there is a material element here. Real people being policed by the stars of these shows, who are performing for the camera, or to the most important members of their audience, their bosses.
They know that their supervisor is going to watch the clip. So I think in a lot of ways, it's also a way of making yourself really salient to your boss.
This is one of On Patrol Live's co-hosts, Sean Styx Larkin.
Speaking of having a smile on the face, good to have Styx Larkin here in the studio.
He's been on the show since before he was a host, when he worked for the Tulsa, Oklahoma Police Department. The same one that said, we're arresting too many black people and you have to show it less.
We're not selecting anybody strictly based off of race or strictly based off of a neighborhood. It's particular people that are in these areas that either are currently causing problems or have caused problems in the past.
The show has vaulted him into legitimate TV stardom. He got the hosting gig, he started dating Lana Del Rey, and got this glowing profile in the New York Times in March 2020, before we knew the cops were bad. And it gets even better. He's earned a spin-off show called Crime Cam 24/7, which you can watch on Fox Nation in order to help you forget about that terrible episode of Gutfeld you just watched. On Patrol Live PD offers a career path for cops wanting to get into media like this, so long as you get results. In 2017, a man named Randy Wallace held a press conference claiming he'd been harassed by Sergeant Larkin and Live PD producers until he signed a consent form.
And basically, he had stalked me from my house knowing that I just signed or was fixed to sign for probation.
For some reason, the compilation of highlights from the Tulsa Police Department has been privated off of Live PD's website. You know, for accountability reasons. But don't worry, I was able to track down the episode where Randy appears.
There's a guy standing over here at one of these convenience stores at the back of a car with his trunk open. And he's got a baby blue long shirt on, which is what our neighborhood Crips in this neighborhood wear. That's a gangster, still dressed in your gang colors, still today, in your 30s. You are.
How the do you see any flags coming out of me?
I see. Once upon a time, baby.
Oh, so you trying to once upon a time, you know me that good.
Looking at that guy through our Tulsa Police record system here, is able to see that he has been arrested a total of 52 separate times in Tulsa.
Tulsa PD wouldn't comment on any of this, but we checked Randy's records with the state courts, and by our count, it's not 52 arrests, it's 12. I think what Officer Larkin is doing here is counting each count as a separate physical arrest. So for example, in 2016, Randy was arrested for driving on a suspended license, but there were 4 related counts. It appears that Larkin is making it seem like each one of those counts was a separate arrest. And as for that gang accusation, Randy says that was a mistake from an incident when he was 13. That has followed him ever since.
Cell phone video and texts provided by Wallace at that press conference seem to indicate that Larkin and the producers lied about what signing the form would mean. I wasn't able to track down the actual video file, but here is audio from it from the Running from Cops podcast.
So when I filmed you the other day, okay, so we can use your face. Usually everybody else's faces, they sounded claimless. Oh yeah, absolutely. The only guys that don't sign them are usually guilty, and then they blur them. So is he guilty of what? Whatever. They don't want to sign.
And then the officer chimes in.
Yeah, people that have been arrested, that are going to jail, stuff like that.
In the end, Randy finally does sign. The 5th time they come looking for him.
Although the show conveniently stripped us of any of that context, instead painting him out to be an irrationally angry black man.
Harassing everybody black!
No, that ain't it.
Man, you wrong for that. You
all right.
Racist mother profiling everybody black.
Where's race got to come into this?
Do you think he was showing out because our camera was there?
I don't think necessarily it was the camera, because the camera crew was with us the week before, but he was in a public parking lot there, numerous people coming in and out of the store, so he had an audience. So he had a group to perform for, basically.
And Larkin isn't the only cop to experience massive popularity from the show. Curtis Wilson, another one of the co-hosts, has launched a fairly successful media career of his own off the back of his On Patrol Live PD commentary. Now a news anchor and a radio host. Deputy Chris Mastriani even made national news for this arrest, which admittedly was pretty wild.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! That's your baby! That's your baby! That's your baby! That's your baby!
That arrest occurred after a lengthy, high-speed pursuit, and we never got great info as to why this suspect was being chased in the first place. Here's all host Dan Abrams has to say about it.
We got to leave this for a minute, because in Richland County in South Carolina, they were going to a possible fight at a party, and someone just took off in a vehicle. They are now chasing this vehicle in Richland County. Let's go there now.
It's an intense pursuit, hitting upwards of 90 miles an hour. And there are a lot of people put in harm's way, from the other drivers on the road, to Deputy Mastriani himself, to the suspect, and his young child. The pursuit ends with the suspect's car flipped over, and miraculously, thankfully, nobody was hurt. Now, I think it's easy to say, well, just don't run and put your child at risk.
3 fathers right here who were furious and incredibly troubled by what we just saw.
Without really acknowledging that there are many reasons why a black man might not want to be involved in a traffic stop. Sometimes you do everything right and it just still doesn't matter. See Philando Castile. And I can hear police defenders saying, well, being scared is no excuse to run. For starters, the police literally get away with murder by saying that they were scared, so it seems like we do, as a society, think that being scared is an excuse. And I think that it's just as easy to say that the police taking off after him led to the dangerous driving that put the child in harm's way in the first place. Along with all of those bystanders, do you think he would have hit 90, swerving in and out of traffic if the cops weren't on his tail? I'm skeptical. These kinds of chases are all over On Patrol Live PD, often with cops engaging in them over small, non-violent infractions and warrants. Things that are probably not worth the public danger a pursuit poses.
There's a stupid warrant from like 10 years ago
Yeah, and you know how many people you could have killed? Over a stupid warrant, you could have killed multiple people.
Oh boy, gee thanks for almost crashing into innocent people to get this guy who violated his probation a decade ago. Vehicle pursuits like this are incredibly dangerous, not just for the participants, but for civilian bystanders, in a way that has been deliberately obscured in real life. Officially, 2,342 people died in pursuit-related deaths from 2017 to 2021. But a recent investigation by the San Francisco Chronicle found that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the agency in charge of recording pursuit-related fatalities, has excluded at least 662 people killed in police pursuits over the past 5 years. And there's almost no way that that's all of them. According to the National Incident-Based Reporting System, about a third of law enforcement agencies failed to report in 2022 altogether. And the Chronicle found that the report included, quote, just one civilian death caused by other dangerous weapons, the category that includes vehicles. The official NHTSA's count deliberately excludes a number of accidents, including fatal crashes in driveways and parking lots, or when officers deliberately ram fleeing vehicles in what's called a pit maneuver.
The pit maneuver stands for Pursuit Intervention Technique, and that's where the officer uses his vehicle to hit the rear quarter panel of the vehicle he's pursuing to knock it on an angle and get it out of the street to a stop.
We're training the pit maneuver to end pursuits in a safe manner. This was an opportunity that was utilized perfectly into this pursuit before it could get too out of hand. The victim was transported to the hospital by ambulance.
And it's not hard to imagine situations where this turns out poorly. This is dashcam footage from a 2021 Georgia incident where a black man named Charlie Moore was pulled over by the police for evasion, despite having no prior contact with the officer, who was also unable to articulate the reason for the stop.
What crime did I commit? You have to articulate that, and also ask for your supervisor.
Okay, one step out of the vehicle.
You have to articulate, sir. You have to articulate what crime I committed.
The officer called for backup, and 4 cops smashed the driver's side window when Moore gave them a hard time.
Open the door. Yo, y'all can't do that. Get your supervisor.
Understandably fearing for his life, given the whole white cops and black men thing, Moore took off, even calling the police supervisor from his vehicle, asking them to de-escalate the situation.
I need you to help me now, because I didn't do anything wrong. I got 3 officers chasing me right now. I asked for a supervisor, they would not give me one. I asked what did I do wrong, they wouldn't tell me. They don't have the cameras on, they don't have anything on. It's just 3 white guys, and they are chasing me around my neighborhood. I am afraid. I'm afraid for my life. Do you hear me? I'm a black man that asked for a reason for being pulled over, and they wouldn't give me that. And then they broke my glass. Y'all gotta help me out here.
Despite knowing that there were children in the car, the chasing police engaged in a pit maneuver, knocking the vehicle off the road and killing the 12-year-old Laden Boykins in the back seat.
Successful.
But according to the Chronicle, the NHTSA does not consider this a pursuit-related death. Quote, in an interview, a NHTSA researcher said officials excluded Laden's death because it involved deliberate intent by law enforcement. So it's okay as long as they do it on purpose. It's not a pursuit-related death if they meant to kill them. You get it? So not only do officers face no repercussions, the event itself is all but erased. Well, except for Charlie Moore, who was convicted of vehicular homicide for the incident. You know, not the cops who knocked him off the road. Him. Also in 2021 in Little Rock, police chased a 12-year-old who had taken his stepfather's SUV. Eventually, the SUV flipped off the road, killing a 14-year-old passenger. And the police publicly denied that a chase had even occurred for over a year, until a blogger called them out for it in 2022, leading the department to release the blistering statement, "We acknowledge that there was a lack of information provided for this incident, and will ensure going forward, incidents of this magnitude are shared in a timely manner." They sound really sorry. In fact, from the incomplete data we have, only 45.2% of pursuit-related deaths are of fleeing drivers. It's more likely that it's either a bystander or a passenger, and those are almost certainly the ones most likely to be excluded from datasets like this. Engaging in a chase is more dangerous to the community than it is to the fleeing suspect. And, stop me if you've heard this one before, the Chronicle found that these pursuits turned fatal disproportionately in Black and Latino populations. Quote, police chases kill 4 times as many Black people per capita as white people, while Latinos die at a rate 50% higher than whites. And there's evidence to suggest that the presence of cameras in a reality cop show like On Patrol Live or Live PD or Cops can increase the frequency of these chases.
It is a very, very serious concern to any of us who are in law enforcement that the decision to engage in that chase was driven more by a need to provide entertainment than it was to keep Williamson County residents safe.
Remember Sheriff Robert Chody I told you about a few minutes ago? I mean, how could you forget such an on-the-nose name? Well, before allegedly scrubbing the footage of Javier Ambler's death, Chody lobbied hard for Live PD to film his officers. And once cameras showed up, the American Statesman found that deputies engaged in 54% more pursuits than the year before, reaching over 100 miles per hour and causing over $17,000 in property damage that year. 20% of these pursuits were of black suspects, despite only representing 10% of the county population. Chases are just good TV, and if you're a cop, engaging in one is a pretty surefire way to get host Dan Abrams to turn national attention to you and your department.
Let's go to Fullerton, California. Officer Matthew Levin is racing somewhere,
where you know that they'll portray you in the most glowing of terms. These shows make communities less safe and glorify the same police action that we should probably be watching with a healthy amount of skepticism, at the very least. At least 1,000 Americans die police-related deaths every year, which would make up 5% of all homicides. And we already know that that's an undercount. A 2022 report by the Washington Post found that the FBI database of fatal police shootings contains just 1/3 of the shootings that the Post has found on their own, in their probably incomplete database. In another recent investigation, the Associated Press found 1,036 people who had died due to less than lethal force, including some who were injected with a sedative without their consent and died of medical complications. However, at the absolute most, only 34% of those deaths had been flagged for their police involvement. According to that report, quote, officers resorted to force in roughly 25% of the cases, even though the circumstances weren't imminently dangerous. Many began as routine calls that other officers have, time and again, resolved safely. By launching prematurely into force, police introduced violence and volatility, and in turn needed to use more weapons, holds, or restraints to regain control, a phenomenon known as officer-created jeopardy. In about 45% of cases, officers became physical after they said someone tried to evade them or resist arrest for non-violent circumstances. Despite dozens of departments cutting ties with On Patrol Live PD, sometimes it still doesn't matter. When you watch the show, you'll notice a vast majority of officers work in sheriff's offices, in part because sheriffs enjoy an unparalleled autonomy and cannot be checked by city councils or mayors.
In the case of Williamson County, with the sheriff there, the county administrators had to take legal action against the sheriff himself to keep him, or try and keep him, from doing another season with Live PD after the Javier Ambler incident. He went behind their back.
Check out my video on Veronica Mars for more about how fucked up sheriffs are. And it's not easy to keep reality cop shows out of communities, because there's a huge media apparatus ready to go to the mat for them. I want to go back to that quote from executive producer John Zito one final time. I promise it's the last time. There was this belief that the show was propaganda and was too pro-law enforcement. But for people who watched the show, we felt that it was very much not the case. This is a pretty obvious way of gatekeeping criticism, and it's because the On Patrol Live PD hive is really insulated and really powerful. Remember that when A&E canceled the show, the fan boycott knocked down primetime viewership on the network by half. When Spokane tried to pass regulations on reality cop shows in 2018, they mobilized in force.
If we watch the news every day, these gentlemen are under fire. Shows like Live PD allow the public to see what these officers go through.
On Patrol Live's website features a massive wall of tweets from fans quick to proclaim their love of the show and to join in the hunt for criminals. In a 2017 interview, Dan Abrams told The Hollywood Reporter that, quote, there have been times when we haven't seen something. The officers didn't see something. But people watching on TV have a different angle. They see someone has thrown drugs out and they tweet about it. The police department then sees the tweets and goes back and finds the drugs. I think the way that quote is framed is really interesting because he clearly is putting himself on the same side as the police. He's like, the police didn't catch it and we didn't catch it and we're there to help them. A telling admission from Dan Abrams. LivePD's old website features YouTube videos from other pro-cop content creators like Donut Operator, someone pioneering the next evolution of this genre, reacting to cell phone and body cam footage from a police perspective.
There's been a lot of videos coming out of Tulsa here lately. Last week we had the one where the officer had to run the kid over because he was hanging out of the car shooting at him.
Now, this isn't to say that the show is going to turn your friend into a Blue Lives Matter apologist if they watch it. It is certainly possible to watch the show as I did, and as Dan Abrams claims other people do too, white-knuckling every episode, horrified by the way benign traffic stops escalate into harassment and felony charges, all legally.
Tom Morris, we have talked about this many, many times. This was something that started with a taillight violation.
A $2 bulb leads to a felony drug distribution charge.
And the outstanding warrant.
And the outstanding warrant.
But I think that it's important to understand the vast media apparatus that has popped up around the show and frames its conversations of the police. Like with all content in the 21st century, consumers of On Patrol Live PD are living in a bubble, just like you are watching this video. Algorithms rule our lives, and you're probably here at the end of a long-ass video about how the cops aren't that great because you were already sympathetic to that idea in the first place. I am simply not charismatic enough to keep people around who aren't interested. But this feedback loop is way more explicit when it comes to On Patrol Live PD. I've mentioned him a few times already, but I think it's worth looking into creator and vampire lookalike Dan Abrams and his other business ventures.
Dan Abrams is a bit of if Rupert Murdoch was also Tucker Carlson, but less successful in both merits. He's still extremely successful. And I say that because Dan Abrams has a bit of a media empire.
Abrams got his career start as a legal correspondent and analyst for Court TV, covering the O.J. Simpson trial before moving over to MSNBC, where he got his own show before eventually rising up to become a lead manager at the network in 2006. Abrams is also a legal contributor to ABC News and regularly weighs in on high-profile court cases.
But as a strictly legal matter, there's an argument to be made that all three of the statutes they're investigating wouldn't require that the documents be classified. But again, this goes to the intentionality conduct.
But Live PD was by far the biggest break of his career, and he's launched a ton of other projects off of its back. Besides the obvious spin-offs, of which there are almost too many to count, Abrams has created Law and Crime, a news network that can only be described as a slightly more researched New York Post. Hosted by failed actor Jesse Weber, Abrams is part owner of Mediaite, a website covering the intersection of media and politics with original reporting and bipartisan commentary. He launched Ambo TV in 2019, a live-streaming Christian sermon network, and he even sells wine bottles with the pictures of dead cops on them. You know, with a whole 20% going to charity. Really selling the idea that cops do the jobs of dangerous heroes. Weirdly, some of these cops have been dead for over 2 decades, though. Also weird that none of the cops on these bottles died from COVID, which again, accounted for roughly 60% of officer deaths in the past 3 years. I just love bringing that up because of how much police unions hated the vaccines. Like, they want to feel safe, but only if it means putting other people behind bars. Abrams also hosts a show on the centrist network News Nation, which I think was best described by writer Joe Berkowitz when he called it, quote, a yassified Fox News. The network basically just takes in disgraced journalists like Chris Cuomo, or Fox News rejects like Leland Vittert. They've even flirted with doing some Bill O'Reilly PR after all of the sexual harassment suits. If it wasn't clear from all of that, Abrams isn't a serious journalist. In a 1-week stretch in May, he interviewed a star of The Bachelorette about meme stocks.
Joining me to explain is Jason Tardik. You may know him from ABC's The Bachelorette.
Covered the border crisis in an unbiased view, claiming,
we didn't book a single politician.
But they did talk to a sheriff who, runs for his office in elections and thus is a politician. Abrams introduced a noted right-wing hack as
a straight shooter on all of this. The veteran Peabody Award-winning journalist, a mentor to me, Geraldo Rivera.
And he brought on, and again, this is all in 1 week, he also brought on Ann Coulter, who was there to clarify that, yes, she meant it when she said she wouldn't vote for Vivek Ramaswamy because he's, quote, an Indian, with absolutely no pushback from Dan.
You didn't say I'm gonna create some controversy here.
If it was like being back in college where you just make crazy, bold statements and then you defend it for an hour.
Right. Have you ever said something and then taken it back and said, you know what, I shouldn't have said that?
No.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever.
I've changed my mind over time on things.
Right.
Hard-hitting journalism at its finest. This wasn't that week, but my favorite guest of his is when he brought on his own dad to talk about how the student protests for Gaza were not free speech.
Dad, good to see you.
Nice to be here.
All right, so first of all, what do you make of the argument that this is a suppression of First Amendment rights or free speech rights?
It doesn't make sense.
I was skeptical, so I Googled him. Floyd Abrams actually is a legendary First Amendment lawyer, having argued 13 cases before the Supreme Court. Although infamous might be a better word for it. In 2001, he represented a tobacco company in a case where they argued they should be able to target children in advertisements because free speech! And then in 2010, he argued for Citizens United that corporations should be able to spend as much money as they want in elections because free speech! Broadly considered one of the worst Supreme Court outcomes of the 21st century.
My dad representing McConnell in the Citizens United case is one of the things I admire him most for.
So interested to hear what you think about the police beating the shit out of protesters, Floyd.
I mean, public universities are allowed to engage in a sort of self-preservation. I mean, they don't have to just sit and not be able to do classes because of noise and not be able to continue in an educational process, fulfilling their educational mission, because students are not playing by the rules of the game.
This isn't close.
No, it's not close.
Much of Dan Abrams' show in the past 6 months has been dedicated to supporting the ongoing ethnic cleansing in Gaza, whether it's to interrupt experts so that they can't explain what he just asked them to explain.
You know, that's Hamas's leverage. That's accurate, but that's all they have. They certainly don't have the military wherewithal to.
I know. We got to feel bad for the poor Hamas folks. All they have is these hostages as leverage, and we got to feel sorry. Anyway, I told you to get the last word, so I'll shut up. George Bisharat, thank you for coming back on the program. Appreciate it.
Or bringing on his good friend Styx Larkin to tell us how the police don't want to beat up protesters. Sometimes they just have to.
And they're almost forcing the cops to get physical, right? When they start grabbing their arms together and not releasing it when the cops come up, you're immediately making cops get physical.
And if they would just do that, and all these protests that we're seeing disperse quietly as they're told to do, I assure you the police would never have to put their hands on them, deploy flashbangs, deploy tear gas, and so forth.
Larkin embodies this kind of aw shucks policing. Look, we didn't want to beat the shit out of you with a nightstick. We're just doing our job. Is it fun? Yes, nobody's denying that. But you're the one who's making us do it. We wouldn't be beating you with a nightstick if you weren't here to get beat with a nightstick. Checkmate, liberals. It's the why are you hitting yourself defense of the police. And I think that this is the real purpose of Abrams' News Nation show, to legitimize his lucrative media empire built on monetizing police harassment. Here's a telling interview from his show where he brought on To Catch a Predator's Chris Hansen to talk about some YouTube vigilantes hunting down suspected PDF files and posting it online.
The problem now is we don't even know exactly what happened here, right? Because they got jump cuts, and I mean, it's not like dealing with you where you had to literally adhere to very...
Still do. We are under legal review. We are under law enforcement review. And yes, we take people into a world they wouldn't normally see. But we take precautions. I'm comfortable with taking that risk to show people what goes on, to educate people, to create this dialogue and this awareness. That's just for clicks.
Oh, they're doing it just for the clicks. Just for the clicks. But how much different is that than what Abrams does with On Patrol Live? They arrest people so that they can sell ad space on Reels. That's what the show is for. And it doesn't take a genius to spot this lack of self-awareness either. Here he is in a fury over Uvalde. Oh wait, no, he's not in a fury over Uvalde. He's in a fury that they released the footage.
But just admit, it wasn't for the families. It was despite the families' wishes. You did it because you got it first, and it's a big scoop. But these are real people, mothers and fathers and siblings and aunts and uncles, who think it's absurd that you claim you were doing it for them. That's the most offensive part.
They didn't consent to that footage being released, so you can't put it out there. That's unethical journalism. Except when you do it, right, Dan? Then it's fine. because none of these concerns seem to have made it into the production of On Patrol Live PD. I think it's fairly obvious what the difference is here. The Uvalde footage makes cops look bad, while On Patrol Live makes them look good. Kinda reductive, but it's really the reason. It's really the only difference. In conversations about police abolition or reform, you will often hear something like this. Well, not all cops are bastards. I know so-and-so, and he's just doing their job. It's a line that I think stumps a lot of people, because it individualizes a critique of a larger system. We all know someone who has a hard job, who just wants to get back home to their family and isn't all that invested in the actual job.
They're trying to enforce the laws. They're being called to the scene. They aren't making the laws. They didn't ask to be sent there. Things got ugly, flashbangs were used.
But the issue here isn't whether an officer has hate in their heart. The issue is the job itself. This individualized approach creates an asymmetrical burden of proof, where to prove that the police are a tool of oppression, you have to prove that each and every single officer has personally thought the N-word and said it out loud, but in order to uphold the status quo, you just have to make the argument that example X of police brutality was just a bad apple. It was an outlier. You can hear this unbalanced argument when Dan writes off an entire protest movement because he doesn't buy that they're mostly peaceful.
Keep hearing that these are mostly peaceful protests, whatever that means. Think about it. Let's say people get hurt or shot at a nightclub. Do we say the people, that the club goers were mostly peaceful?
While never extending that same criticism to the police.
When they see the police, they think the worst. They don't realize that the reason you have so many more police there is for their safety and for the safety of the people they're trying to get out of there.
Shows like Cops or On Patrol Live place audiences firmly in the shoes of the police, telling stories from their perspectives and individualizing the issues they face, giving a blank check to any number of behaviors we might find abhorrent.
The dog is okay, our officer's okay, the individual's gonna be checked out by EMS for the canine apprehension.
So a successful apprehension by the canine there.
These shows strip police encounters of context and instead have us focus on the characters involved, while real people go to jail. Something I've been asked a lot in doing this series is if there's a good way to do a cop show. Maybe there's a way for some cop shows to address policing in a good way, to tackle the difficult issues, to show it as it is. Something like maybe We Own the City or The Wire, two shows that I've done videos on. Those shows do have their issues, of course, but maybe there's a discussion to be had about what works and what doesn't. That's a topic for another time, because I'm sorry, there's no good way to produce a show like On Patrol Live. There's no ethical way to commercialize mass incarceration. That's it. That's the whole thing. Even if you instantly released every single person who was arrested on the show and blurred all their faces because they hadn't consented to being used by reels to sell ad space, you'd still have fundamental problems. These shows still use the aesthetic of reality to conflate crime with visible poverty, which is something I would argue really affects how people think about crime and policing as a solution to crime. Poll after poll finds that American perception of the prevalence of crime is completely divorced from reality. Despite crime, and especially violent crime, falling dramatically in the last 30 years, in 23 of 27 Gallup surveys since 1993, 60% or more of Americans have claimed that there's more crime nationally than the year before. All while also acknowledging that they don't see this crime wave in their local areas. While there was an uptick in murder during the pandemic, that has mostly fallen back to the larger historical trend line. But media focus has an incredibly potent ability to shape our perceptions. Just check out the number of media articles in New York City about shootings versus the actual occurrences of those shootings. When shows like Cops or On Patrol Live fuse poverty and crime within the context of policing, it's impossible to miss the message. The only solutions to poor people, whether it's white trash or minority gang members or simply people who don't have homes, is more police.
Well, that's why these no loitering signs are so important for private businesses.
There might not be a way to slow the propaganda these shows spread, but we can at least make the communities they police safer by removing them from the equation.
You can see these really big grassroots movements in some of the places where, mid-sized to larger cities that have signed up to film with these shows over time. There are these sort of groundswell movements of people who, want the contracts to be canceled or not renewed, and they often succeed in that.
In 2018, after months of livepd shooting with the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, the city passed regulations on reality cop shows.
City lawmakers are set to vote on imposing new restrictions on those shows. They could decide to make the production companies get a business license in the city of Spokane. They could also require producers to screen footage before it airs to keep anyone with mental health problems from appearing on TV.
The regulations are honestly pretty moderate, but it's telling that On Patrol livepd never shot in the county after they were passed. In 2021, Texas passed the much more restrictive Javier Ambler law, which states, a law enforcement agency is prohibited from authorizing a person to accompany and film a peace officer acting in the line of duty for the purpose of producing a reality show. You know that a police reform has to be a complete no-brainer if even a right-wing freak like Greg Abbott will sign it.
In fact, there are 134,000 police officers currently working in departments that film with one of these shows at some point in the past 30 years. That is 20% of all sworn officers and more officers than identify as female. I think it's important to think about the content of these shows and their effects on the viewership side, but I think it's really important to remember that there are actual police patrolling, their actual constituents on the other side of the camera as well, and that is affecting massive numbers of people.
There are so many Americans being policed by departments and sheriff's offices that work with these shows, who will edit the film to show cops in the gentlest light possible, destroy evidence of police brutality, and whose cameras directly lead to less safe communities. They lead to an increase in petty arrests for these same low-level drug offenses that we all recognize have led to the US being home to a full 25% of the world's population in pretrial detention.
So that's going to put it into possession with intent to distribute based upon the weight of the gram.
That's more than a gram? Can't be.
With field packaging weight, yep.
What do you mean field packaging?
In the baggies.
Oh, y'all weigh the bag and everything? Dang.
All right,
that's not right, man. That's not right at all.
Once, like you said before, we don't make the law, we just enforce it.
No.
And they do it all in the context of a media feedback loop designed to crush dissent and promote the police as a force for good in direct response to the overwhelming national consensus that we need changes to the institution. Despite cameras being more ubiquitous than ever, I'm not sure how many of us really realize that they fundamentally change interactions. Even if you're setting out to make a documentary like the Cops creators claim, the act of making that documentary has an effect on the subject you're supposedly there to just observe. Here's an example. In 1970, British documentarian Terence Dixon went to Paris to make a documentary about James Baldwin, the prominent black writer and activist who left America in 1948 because he was sick of the country's racism. While Dixon's intent seems to have been some kind of intimate look into Baldwin's mind, throughout the documentary, you can feel Baldwin's frustration with the entire project, having to explain himself to the same kinds of people he'd been trying to leave behind in America, all while Dixon tries to trip him up with questions and complaining to the camera that Baldwin isn't cooperating enough.
By this time, Baldwin was quite hostile to us and had attracted a group of black American students whom he wanted to accompany him whenever he was filming. One of them was particularly dominant.
As it turns out, the presence of the camera and the director are a fundamental part of the encounter, and the subject shifts from ostensibly being James Baldwin to being the documentary itself. The 30-minute film, meeting the man James Baldwin in Paris, isn't all that dissimilar from an episode of Cops, with the film trying to paint its subject as arrogant and aloof without engaging in how unnerving it is to have people chase you around with cameras and ask you to explain yourself.
I know you don't know it because of the way you talk to him.
I'm trying to solicit something from him. I'm trying to get him to communicate with me in a genuine way, which he isn't. He's communicating with me from behind a barrier, which I don't want to
has a life to lose. You don't.
It makes you think of the perspectives being highlighted, those being ignored, and the film is available to watch right now on this video sponsor, MUBI. MUBI is a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from all around the globe. It's an incredible collection of high-quality cinema that you won't find anywhere else. Films that look at the world from a different perspective. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover. The hand-selected curation will take you across the globe and give you a different look on things that you'd taken for granted. You can try MUBI free for 30 days at mubi.com/skipintro. That's mubi.com/skipintro for a whole month of great cinema for free. And thank you so much for watching. Please share, like, subscribe. And now that nobody's watching, I can again plug my Patreon, patreon.com/skipintro. There you can get the full interviews with Emma Rackstraw and with Sean Campbell. And we have live we have mailbags, we have live watch-alongs. I've been gone for a little while, and people on Patreon know why, and people who aren't don't. So maybe, if you want the tea, you can do that. We do live watch-alongs of shows, like the season premiere of Blue Bloods, which may or may not have given me an aneurysm, which led to my recent absence. Anyways, yeah. Thanks again for watching, and talk at ya next time. Bye!